Hello, everybody. Welcome from cold Montreal. Uh, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'd like to thank Christina and Amy for the invite. We're going to go about 90 minutes looking at mastering the news interview. Uh, there's not going to be any formal question period because I think, as you know, all good journalists should be rude and interrupt all the time, anyways. So I think we should make this much more a discussion. We're all professional journalists. We all have lots of experience. You have experience with things that I'm not familiar with, vice versa. So even though it's Zoom and it's hard, don't raise your hands or anything. Just interrupt and say, well, what about this? Or I disagree, or this. Especially, I want to hear about your experiences when I show you examples. Um, Let me know, problems you had, solutions you came up with. Also, this entire slideshow is on my website in a PDF format, so you can snap pictures and get screen grabs, but you don't have to worry about taking notes because all of the tips are available, plus many more. Let's hope we don't have too many um, technical glitches. And let's get underway. Well, hello to the 50th state from the 51st state. Um, uh, this is kind of, exaggerating what Canada is about, but this is my home in the mountains. I live in the city, but we go up every weekend. There's my dog who loves the snow. And I must admit, I'm an avid cyclist. I cycle all through the summer, but I love winter. It's always been my favorite season. So, also Canada, by the way, is home of the Hawaiian pizza, invented in Canada in 1962. Little things you
You're
didn't
fighting
know.
words here.
Ah, okay, but seriously, we're going to look at how all kinds of powerful people take on journalists. And, Obama, my current prime minister, who's not around for long, your president. And as a journalist, right or left, progressive or reactionary, I don't care. I don't care about people's politics. As a journalist, I'm up against power, and everybody in power, from a mayor to a man who abuses his wife, to political leaders, they all use the same tricks and they're good at it. And they tend to be better at it than we are. Um, so, what we'll try to cover today is how every interview is a fight for control, three different types of interviews, five rules of good interviews and how to break them, what to do when you get into trouble, because you will. And I hope we have time for some strategy and tactics. So, briefly, I've interviewed people around the world. I've interviewed Taliban leaders. For those of you who aren't sure, the Taliban is the guy on your right. Um, I've interviewed leaders of the American Hells Angels, uh, George Christie of the Ventura Hells Angels. I was embedded and interviewed American soldiers during the war in Iraq. I've interviewed bank robbers and cops accused of killings. And I did a book on American girls who were prostituted. Um, so, from the powerful to the abused. And one of the things that I learned over the years, and it's the first major point I want to make, is that every interview is a constant fight for control. And if you think about sports, any kind of sports, right? The recent um, Super Bowl, uh, part of the reason that the Eagles won is they had more possession of the ball. You can't score if you don't have possession of the ball. It's as simple as that. Uh, in sports, you're lucky if you control the ball 50% of the time. In interviews, you have to be in control 100% of the time. And you're never going to do that. Maybe you'll get 95 or 90. Most of the time, 70, who knows? And with a professional politician, you might lose control fairly quickly. So we're going to look at the tricks they use and what you could do to keep control of an interview. Um, I want to start with this example. Um, uh, Lucy Williamson is one of my favorite journalists from the BBC. This is an excerpt of an interview she did with Andrew Tate. You might know him, right? Self-described misogynist. This was filmed when he was under arrest in Romania. And watch how, from the beginning, there's a very explicit fight for control over who controls the interview. Take a listen.
We are doing an interview with you because you're facing some very serious allegations.
Correct.
Rape, human trafficking.
Yep.
And also because there's a great deal of concern about the things you say and the impact that they have on young people, on women. Let's start with the allegations.
So,
we
sorry,
are doing an interview with you.
I just wanted to advance it a
about
bit.
the thing.
So what's great about right away, she sets the rules. She says, this is what I want to talk about. This is what we're doing. So she sets the guidelines right away. Then she starts her questioning. Sorry. It's the problem with a smaller screen.
We are
Here we go.
allegations, human trafficking.
Yep.
And also because there's a great deal of concern about the things you say and the impact that they have on young people, on women. Let's start with the allegations. Have you raped anybody?
Absolutely not.
Have you trafficked anybody?
Absolutely not.
Exploited any women for
Absolutely
money?
not.
But you have admitted using emotional manipulation to get women to work in the webcam industry for you.
No. We have an open criminal investigation. I am absolutely not really sure I'll be found innocent. I know the case better than you. I know it intimately and you don't. I have seen all the criminal files and the evidence against me.
So right away, he's trying to seize control, right? I know it better than you. What does she do?
You haven't. I know the truth of what happened and you don't. And I'm telling you absolutely and utterly, I've never hurt anybody, that the case that's been put against me is completely and utterly fabricated, and I'm never going to be found guilty of anything. And it's very difficult for me to answer your in-depth questions because we're sitting here inside of the territory of Romania. I'm beholden to the Romanian legal system, and I'm not going to incriminate myself.
Let me read you then what you...
She doesn't fall for the bait. She keeps on track. She doesn't answer his taunts.
You have said about what you have done.
Sure.
You have said, my job was to meet a girl, go on a few dates, sleep with her, get her to fall in love with me to the point where she'd do anything I say, and then get her on webcam so we could become rich together.
I don't think that's what I personally said. I think
that's exactly what you said on your website.
No, I've never said that. That's something that you found on the internet. Doesn't mean I've said it.
In your words.
And again, once again, if any female on the planet has a problem with me, I strongly recommend her to go to the police and try and pursue me for criminal charges. I'm actually such a nice person that I've never had anyone come at me.
The BBC has spoken to somebody since your arrest who says exactly those things, that with you it's all manipulation, there's an ulterior motive to everything you do.
Is this Sophie? Oh, it's Sophie, the fake name, no face. No,
I was so intent on wanting to please him and wanting him to be...
Doesn't fall for the debate, right? Doesn't challenge him on Sophie, keeps reading from their transcript.
Happy that I was just kind of, yeah, okay, do whatever you want.
And what is she accused? Has she accused me of a crime, this imaginary Sophie?
She's making the point that there is
Has she accused me of a crime?
Emotional or psychological manipulation.
Notice, and we'll talk about this later about keywords. She doesn't fight him on the word imaginary, right? She continues as if she didn't hear that word.
I've asked you a question, and I've allowed you into my house.
I'm asking...
Now, here comes the key fight for control. Let me just back up. He literally says, I am now in control, and watch what she does.
Or psychological manipulation.
I've asked you a question, and I've allowed you into my house.
I'm asking you a question.
Correct, but you're not the boss here. Because I've allowed you into my house.
I'm asking you the questions.
Correctly, and I'm telling you.
You get to decide the answers.
No.
See that? He says, you know, you're not the boss, and she stands her ground saying, I'm asking the questions.
You're equal here. I've allowed you into my house. You don't come here with a position of authority. I'm doing you the favor as legacy media, giving you relevance by speaking to you. And I'm telling you now, this Sophie, which the BBC has invented, which there's no face of, nobody knows who she is.
The BBC did not invent her.
Of course not. And because you never invent anything. And she's not filed criminal charges against me. What are we talking about here? What is she saying?
We're talking about emotional manipulation into the sex industry for your financial gain.
Absolute garbage.
I'm describing women who are going to court to accuse you of rape and human trafficking.
Sophie hasn't gone to court. Sophie doesn't exist.
I'm describing women who have spoken to the BBC at length.
Sophie doesn't exist.
And other media organizations.
Okay. You could watch more of it, but you see how not only is she asking the tough questions, and I'll give you an example later from Trump, she never falls into his trap. And explicitly, when he says, I'm the boss, she says, I'm asking the questions, you could choose what answer. So this is rare where you actually see explicitly what a fight for control is. But this is what happens underneath every interview. We'll talk a bit later about what you do when you're interviewing a victim, which is somewhat different, and where, under certain circumstances, you can relinquish control. All right, let's move on to the second point. Now, how do you prepare for the tough interview? Let's hear briefly from you. You get a quick assignment. The mayor is making an emergency announcement, or he's resigning because of a scandal. You have a few hours to prepare for your interview. What are some of the things you do? Let's hear from you. What are some of the basic things you would do? Let's go. I can't hear.
Well,
We're all waiting for somebody else.
write down the questions.
Right.
Okay, write down the questions. What else? Where would you get your questions from?
And read as much as possible about what's already been written.
Yeah. We're journalists, so what we do is we default to research and facts because that's what we're good at. And in most cases, somebody you're interviewing has almost certainly been interviewed before, has said something. So you do the basic research, and that's good. And there's other courses I can teach on how to do investigations and research, but you're all good at it. What I want to focus on today is to change your attitude towards interviews because you're focusing on the tactics, the questions, and I want you to also think about the strategy. So let's do a quick test. Let's say Amy, for some bizarre reason, suddenly sees you have a hole on the website, and she wants you to do a quick story on this course, right? Canadian journalist Julian Chair teaches the Civil Beat team on how to do interviews. Dreadful story, but you have to do it. So quickly, what are some questions you would ask me? Let's go.
I want to sign it, I can say what I want, but, I think one question would be, tell us about the toughest interview you've had where you lost control.
Right. Good
You can see
question.
where that tipping point is.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. Come on.
I'd be curious how your process has changed over time as you refined your process.
Right.
And
Good,
what caused
good.
it to change is the advent of social media, for example, made a difference in how you approach.
Right.
Obviously, you can
Right.
do a lot more backgrounding than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, you're good journalists. They're all good they're all good questions because they're open ended.
Yeah.
They get me to tell a story. If you
To
think
what?
about it, though,
Yeah,
pardon me.
yeah, another question. Yeah, to what extent, when you're really trying to keep control of the interview, do you focus on closed questions as if you were doing a cross-examination where you say, well, isn't this true? Isn't this true?
That's
Sort of like,
that's a great
do you
question. We'll
sort of,
deal with it later. We'll deal with that later in terms of breaking the rules. That's a good point. What I want to look at though is you have to think about the type of questions. And if you think about it my feeling is from the dawn of time, from the time the first cave people discussed who had killed the mastodon and who was going to eat, to the time you ask your little boy why he was sent home from school and got into a fight, there are three types of interviews. There's the information interview, the emotion interview, and the accountability interview. And if you think about it, you all ask basically information questions. And to some degree, and also I think the problem is most of the time we spend way too much time on information questions. And if you look at the quotes in your stories, most of them, or a lot of them, are information quotes, which are the least interesting and the least important to put in quotes. You need the information, but you don't need that in quotes. Emotion, a couple of your questions headed towards emotion. What was the toughest interview you did? But it still was mainly, and nobody asked an accountability question like who made you God? What are your qualifications for teaching? Right? Do you really think journalism can be taught? Right? You have to think where are you going with your interview. You meet you're assigned to interview a woman whose daughter just got killed, obviously you're going to get information at the beginning. When did you learn your daughter was killed in the car accident? How old was she? Then, of course, you want to get to emotion. What does her loss mean to you? How do you feel? What's your fondest memory? That's what you're mainly going to want, not this. You get this and write it up later. But if you can, of course, you go for accountability. How guilty did you feel that you were drunk at the wheel in the crash that killed her? Now you have to build that way, because if you start here, you're not going to get anywhere. You start slow and you build, unless you only have 1 minute. The mayor is coming out of his office. You have one question to ask. You ask the accountability question. But if you have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you build. Watch. The best interviews are in this order. Watch what happens when Gayle King interviewed R. Kelly. This was before he got arrested. He was charged with various crimes. And watch how she pretty much follows the ladder.
The singer, as you know, has faced intense scrutiny for more than a decade now. It was reignited in January after the Lifetime docuseries Surviving R. Kelly featured interviews with 7 accusers and former members of his inner circle. They all say that Kelly preys on vulnerable women and young girls. I am surprised that you agreed to do it. Why are you sitting down with us today?
Information.
I'm very tired of all of the lies. I've been hearing things and seeing things on the blogs, and I'm just tired.
What are the lies that you're hearing that disturb you most?
Oh my God.
Disturb, emotion.
All of them. Got little girls trapped in the basement, helicopters over my house, trying to rescue someone that doesn't need rescuing because they're not in my house, handcuffing people, starving people. I have a harem, a cult. I don't even really know what a cult is, but I know I don't have one,
Have you done anything that you regret? Have you done anything wrong?
Lots of
Emotion
things wrong
and then
when
accountability.
it comes to women that I apologize, but I apologize in those relationships at the time I was in the relationships.
Have you broken any laws when it comes to women?
Absolutely not.
The 6-part series interviewed 50 people.
Now she moves in for the
family
kill.
members, your former tour manager, numerous women who all claim that you abused them. Are you saying everybody in that documentary was not telling the truth about you? Everybody?
They are lying on me.
Why would these women say the same thing about you? That you are controlling, that you are abusive, that you tell women when to eat, when to go to the bathroom, when they can sleep, where they can dress. Why would all these women tell these different stories about you if they were not true? And they don't know each other. That defies logic to me.
Stop it. Y'all quit playing. Quit playing.
Robert.
I didn't do this stuff. This is not me, y'all. I'm fighting for my life. Y'all killing me with this. I gave y'all 30 years of my career.
Robert.
30 years of my career.
Oh my God.
Tell me. You killing me, man.
Now,
Control entirely.
it's a classic interview, and it works because she follows. She starts with information, moves on to emotion, gives him a chance to open up, and then goes to accountability.
The singer.
And what I want you to think about is when you set off to do a story, you sit down with Amy or an editor, and you have to decide not just what questions you're going to ask the mayor or the head of Hawaii Electric or a man accused of abusing his wife. You also have to say, what's the percentage of questions that are going to be information? Hopefully 10%, In TV, I would get that out of the way before the cameras start rolling. And then maybe an interview is going to be 80% emotion because you're dealing with a fire survivor. But with the head of Hawaiian Electric Company, it should be 90% accountability, maybe 10% emotion. How do you feel being in the hot seat? Do you regret taking this job? But stay,
Especially
back.
at this exact moment.
Right, exactly. But go back over your interviews and go back over your stories. Just look at the quotes. Just isolate the quotes. I do this week. Take any of your stories, take all the words out, just put the words that are in quotes on a screen and see how much was information versus emotion versus accountability. Way too much is information, right? That's not what an interview is about. Unless you're interviewing an expert on climate change and how it affects fires, right? Then with an expert, you probably want 80% information. But I would work out a percentage before you head out the door. All right.
Can I ask a question on that front?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. So when you have an accountability interview, like let's say the head of a government agency that you are investigating, and you do
Yep.
have a certain percentage that has to be information because you have to fact check, but
Of course.
do you also need the majority to be kind of accountability questions? For those types
Yeah,
of
I mean,
interviews,
it's not a hard and fast, like I mainly do accountability interviews because I worked for an investigative TV show similar to your 60 Minutes. CBC's The Fifth Estate. So, but we'd gather information from experts, we'd get witnesses, and victims. For the accountability interviews, often I had the luxury of maybe an hour or a 2-hour interview. Um, but yes, you need to fact check the information. If you can, you do that over the phone ahead of time, or you do it with somebody, an aide to the mayor or whatnot. But if you need to spend 20, 30 minutes doing information, go ahead. Also, it helps lull the person, right? They're going to be relaxed, and we have to be fair. We do want to fact check, right? And it's also great to sort of say, I want to be sure I have my facts correct. Is it true that you're running a deficit of da 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 da, and then he or she corrects you? That's all good. That's great. Then move into the emotion because it's good to show that the person you're interested in their feelings. But then, yes, you have to, you know, uh, focus on accountability, and make sure your questions are built that way. All right, some basic rules for good interviews. Let's have some fun. You know, when I was a boss running our investigative show, I was always surprised by, you know, uh, uh, people who would come, journalists who would come back to me and I'd say, how'd the interview go? And they said, oh, it was bad. The person was monosyllabic or he didn't want to answer the questions. And that's like asking a doctor, how did the operation go? And he said, oh, he was very sick. He died. Right. I mean, the point is, we can't, of course, people are going to lie to us. Of course, politicians are going to be unwilling to sit down and tell us the truth, and victims are going to be nervous or shy. But you get the answers you deserve. I always tell the story back in the 90s, before cell phones really became quite common. I was covering the war in Somalia, and we got a break. We made it to a UN station. There was this huge satellite desk phone. We got one phone call back home, and I called my daughter, who was 4 years old at the time. I'm happy to say she went on to work at the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and is now a film editor. But at the time, she was a 4-year-old girl. Her dad's in Africa. I get the connection. I go, hi, Miriam, it's Dad. What are you doing? There's a pause, and she says, talking to you, because that's what I asked her. She answered my question, right? That's not what I meant, but she answered the question. Ask a stupid question, you get a stupid answer. Let's look at some obvious examples. This is the most obvious one. Most of us know it. It's quite remarkable how we still make that mistake. Obviously, you want to ask the 5 W's. You want to avoid yes, no answers, although later we'll talk about how you want to force a yes, no answer. But right now, we're talking about the rules before you break them. I love this example. Is the story? This is a interview with a young boy who nearly died from E. coli.
It was full of blood, and obviously that raised a lot of concern. We took him to the hospital immediately.
Elijah, do you remember those days?
Yes.
I think that I would like to see federal,
That's what she
something
asked.
done at the federal level whereby ranchers or whoever's responsible for the feeding of the cattle, that there's a system in place whereby, we can guarantee that there's no E. coli in the system.
All right, Elijah, do you want to eat steak again?
No.
Now, I use this example because kids, answer the questions they're asked, but so will politicians. What she meant was tell us how sick you were after you ate that steak. Instead of do you want to eat steak again, she wants an emotion question. How frightened are you to eat steak today? But she asks a yes/no question. She gets a yes/no answer. This is more common. And in fact, I would wager I do it all the time, and I bet most of you do it, is we give people escape routes. Instead of asking one question, we ask multiple questions, and that gives them an easy out. And then there's also the unneeded adjective, the phrase, the unneeded fact. Okay, watch this interview. This is an athlete, right? He hasn't been trained by media people the way politicians have. So listen to the question from this journalist.
You know, you're down 19 to the Pacers, you're down 11 heading into the fourth tonight in this game. Is there ever a point at which you don't think you can come back? And what's your mindset?
Okay, so this is her question. Is there ever a point when you were losing and at which you didn't think you can come back to win? And what's your mindset? All right. Now, which question do you think he wants to avoid? Which does he want to answer?
Definitely doesn't want to answer number one.
Yeah.
Wants to answer.
Pardon me, you say he wants to answer number one?
No, he wants to answer the second one. What's your mindset? But doesn't want to confront ever having a thought.
Well, it's interesting because I think, I mean, I guess you could take it different ways. This is a yes/no question. Always easy to answer a yes/no question. And she's basically saying, did you ever think you were not going to win? Every athlete will always say, no, you know, we always thought we were going to win. This, it's not expressed the best way, but she's kind of saying, how were you guys feeling when you were down in the dumps, right? If you were interviewing, you know, the Eagles, the Chiefs quarterback at halftime at the Super Bowl, you'd want to say, what's going through your mind as your team crashes? Not, do you think you're going to win? Because watch what he's going to do. It's a yes/no question, right? No one's ever going to say, yes, we thought we were losers. Watch what happens.
You know, you're down 19 to the Pacers, you're down 11 heading into the fourth tonight in this game. Is there ever a point at which you don't think you can come back? And what's your mindset?
No.
Yeah, so tell me about that.
Thank you.
Right? You give a politician or anybody a choice, they will always go for the easiest answer.
You know.
Another example, the unneeded word or question. This is Pierre Poilievre. He is the Conservative leader in Canada, and at this point in the polls will be Canada's next prime minister. Watch, this is a famous interview. So watch what happens when this hapless journalist starts off with a good question.
The point of this question is, I mean, why should Canadians trust you with their vote?
Good question, right? You can ask any politician, but watch what he does next.
Given, you know, not just the sort of ideological inclination in terms of taking the page out of Donald Trump's book, but
what are you
also
talking about? What page? What page? Can you give me a page? Give me the page.
Right?
Latches on to the
Game
fact.
over, right? Because the journalist babbles on and says useless things instead of sticking to the question. What is a question mark? When you were in grammar school, in basic school, elementary school, what did you learn about a question mark?
The end of the sentence.
Exactly. It's the end of a sentence. If a question mark comes out of your mouth and you see as you look down that your lips are still moving, right? Why? Right? Once that question mark comes out of your mouth, stop talking or say, you know what? That's not a good question. Let me rephrase it. That's fine. But once that question comes out of your mouth, stop talking. Go back. I dare you, go back, listen to your tapes of your interviews. You know, I hope you're recording most of your interviews for safety and legal reasons and other reasons. And listen, and you'd be amazed how many times you ask more than one question because you're nervous. You're not sure you're getting it right. What's the editor going to want? Oh, I should ask him this. One question at a time. Please. Next, Keep it clean and simple. A single word. We saw how the politician jumped on the page and the book line, but avoid controversial words. If you say, "Isn't that what all climate change deniers say?" The person you're interviewing will say, "Oh, I don't deny climate change. I just dispute its cause." You ask somebody about radical Islam, they'll dispute the language you're using. Listen to this important question that was asked Obama when he was president. He's signing a nuclear deal with Iran, but there are still Americans in jail.
Well, there are 4 Americans in Iran, 3 held on trumped-up charges, according to your administration, 1 whereabouts unknown. Can you tell the country, sir, why you are content with all the fanfare around this deal to leave the conscience of this nation and the strength of this nation unaccounted for in relation to these 4 Americans? Well, there are 4 Americans.
Okay, a good question, right? Because it's asking an important thing about 4 imprisoned Americans. What's the one word? I haven't counted all the words, but let's assume there's about 50 or 60. What's the one word that Obama is going to jump on to avoid answering the question? Pardon me?
Content.
Yeah. Watch what Obama does.
I got to give you credit, Major, for how you craft those questions. The notion that I'm content as I celebrate with American citizens languishing in Iranian jails? Major, that's nonsense. And you should know better. I've met with the families of some of those folks. Nobody's content.
You should also know better than to use a trigger word like that. We'll never know what Obama's answer was about what he was going to do about the hostages because of a single unnecessary word. And the politicians listen for those words to escape the questions. Watch what you say. Now, the worst question, of course, is not asking them. And instead making a statement and getting into a debate. Why will you always lose a debate with somebody in an interview? Even if you have the facts, you have all the proof the mayor took money from organized crime. You have all the proof that the company director knew they were polluting the river. You have it. Why do you not want to get into a debate?
Because you're not getting information.
Pardon me?
Because you're not getting information. The point of the interview is to get the information
That's certainly one point. But why will you also always lose? Aside from it not being efficient, because you're right, you're not going to get the information why are you always going to lose a debate, even when you know you're in the right?
Because you're stopping asking questions. You're just sort of trading.
Yeah, we'll show that in a moment. And the other reason, which is connected, is that you're always going to lose because it's an unfair fight. Because you know, if you were in the debating club debating a politician, that'd be fine. You're both using the same rules, but the politician can lie, deflect, make up stuff. You can't, right? And we'll see some examples from Trump. You have to stick, police are allowed to lie. By law, police can, in an interview, tell somebody, "Oh, your brother told us he saw you kill that man." They can lie. We can't. So you're never going to win a debate. Don't get into a debate. Now, debates can be fun and they could be exciting, especially on TV. But, as somebody just said, you're never going to get the answers. Here's a good example.
لا انت اللي بدأت انا اخلص لا يا انت اللي بدأت شاكر انت اللي شاكر يا اخوان انت اللي بدأت لا يا انت اللي بدأت يا سامي لا انتوا خارج الملة انتوا خونة الاسلام انتوا خونة الاسلام انتوا خونة الاسلام
أنا بشكر حضراتكم
وأنا الحقيقة عاوز أرد التحية الأستاذ منتصري.
I like when he throws the glass at the end. All right. Aside from the fun, though, as somebody, aside from the fact you'll always lose, is that if you make statements, Lucy Williamson could have challenged, when he said fake Sophie or, BBC makes up stuff or I'm the boss here. If she had fallen into his trap, the tables would be turned and he would land up interviewing her. Now, it's not just beginner journalists. This is a famous interview when Mike Wallace, and it doesn't get better than Mike Wallace as an interviewer, interviews Morgan Freeman on Black History Month. The audio's a little weak, so I've run the transcript. Watch what happens. Oh, Jesus. Here we go.
Black History Month you find ridiculous. Why? You're going to relegate my history to a month? Oh, come on, what do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? No, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
All right, I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
So what just happened there, right? Morgan Freeman did an excellent interview with Mike Wallace, right? Now, what should Mike Wallace have said in answer to this question? What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? Or any politician? You ask the mayor, what do you say, Mr. Mayor, to people who say you're ignoring the need to clean up sewage and instead organizing frivolous holidays, whatever. And he turns to you and say, well, what would you do? Would you leave the sewage untreated, right? If a mayor or anybody turns the question to you, what do you do? What's your answer?
I'd like to know what you would do because it's your job.
And then he says, yes, but these are tough questions. I'm curious what you would do.
You're allowed to answer tough questions, so why don't you answer it? Do you not know how?
Ooh.
Sorry, that's
All
more
right,
the
but you could say,
confrontational one.
yeah,
I have the image of the table getting thrown.
Yeah, but you could say, yeah, but Civil Beat has been writing a lot. You guys think you know the answer. What's your answer to the problem of sewage? What do you say?
You could say, it sounds like you don't want to answer the question.
Which is true. And I'll show you an example where it's fun to call the person out. But I think what you also have to say is you have to say, it's not my job. Nobody cares what I think. I'm the schmuck with the pencil, right? Like you have to refuse to answer the question because and you guys said part of it. You said, well, you're the mayor, but that's the point. You're the mayor. You're the head of the factory. Nobody cares what I think. If you don't want to answer the question, that's fine. But nobody's interested in my opinion. They want to know what you're doing about the fire, right? You must absolutely always say, it's not my job. It's a classic trick by people in power. Don't fall into it.
But that's harder with Morgan Freeman. He's not in charge of Black History Month. So what would you do there?
But he's of course, but he is a person of power. He's one of the most respected Black men in America. So, and it's a good question about Black History Month. And if he says, which month is yours? Wallace has to say, people don't want to know about me. They want to know about you. Why, as one of the most prominent Black leaders, you're against Black History Month? And then he'll give his answer. Why do we need just 1 month, right? But you just absolutely have to refuse. Nobody cares what Mike Wallace thinks, right? You've got to push it back to him. And then if he refuses, you're right. Then you say, why are you so reluctant to answer this question? Finally, it's amazing how often journalists don't listen to the actual words. You have a sheet of questions. You're determined to go on. Because I write many books and I go on book tours and I go on radio and TV shows, it's amazing when I will plant in my answer certain words that I hope they'll pick up on because it's related to their city or I know it's an interesting topic, and they just don't listen to the cue and go on to question 3 because that's what's the next question on their right? You know, prosecutors in a trial, right? The prosecutor is asking a defendant about, say, an alleged rape, and they would say, well, you know, where were you on the night the woman claims you raped her? And he might say, I wasn't there. Yeah, I was out drinking with my boys. Ah, drinking. How often do you drink, sir? Once he brings up drink, it's fair game. If the prosecutor had asked about drinking, he could, it could be ruled out of order, or the person could deny it. But because he used the word drinking, it's fair games. Listen to the words. The best interviews I've seen is where even conversation, Carrie Gross on NPR is great at that. Whatever question she asks, the person answers, and the person will say something halfway through, will say, I'm sad, or it scared me, and then she'll pick up that word and she'll say, you said you were sad. What made you sad? Grab their words, throw the weight back at them. Jonathan Swan, who now works for the New York Times, when Trump was president the first time, he's asking him about COVID, and we're going to use a lot of Trump because he's an expert dissembler. And watch, you're never going to get Trump to admit he's wrong or admit, yes, you know, I could have done it better. But watch how Jonathan Swan doesn't get into a debate, but he jumps on Trump's words. He uses Trump's own words.
There are those that say, you can test too much. You do know that.
Who says that?
Oh, just read the manuals, read the books.
Manuals?
Read the
What
books.
manuals?
Read the books.
What books?
What testing does?
No, I'm
is
sorry.
it shows, wait a minute. Let me explain. What testing does, it shows cases. It shows where there may be cases.
I've covered you for a long time. I've gone to your rallies. I've talked to your people. They love you. They listen to you. They listen to every word you say. They hang on your every word. They don't listen to me or the media or Fauci. They think we're fake news. They want to get their advice from you. And so when they hear you say everything's under control, don't worry about wearing masks, I mean, these are people, many of them are older people,
What's
Mr.
your
President.
definition of control? Yeah. Under the
It's giving them a false sense of
right
security.
Now, I think it's under control. I'll tell you what.
How? 1,000 Americans are dying a day.
They are dying. That's true. And it is what it is. There are those.
It's one of the better interviews because, again, look at what he does. He says there's too much testing. Who says that? What manuals? What books? He says under control. How? He doesn't use the word under control, but he could have said, what do you mean under control? 1,000 Americans are dying a day. He uses Trump's words.
It's what it is.
You know, very effective, very effective.
There are
That's
All right,
true.
so those are at least some of the basic rules I try to follow, right? Don't ask open-ended questions. Ask open-ended questions. Don't give people escape routes by asking more than one question. Keep it simple. The worst question is not asking one. Don't get into a debate, and listen for the keywords. But as any good football player knows, or any athlete knows, you want to know the rules so that once you master them, you know how and when to break them. And one of you raised this early on. There are times when you want to break the rules once you know what they're about. The first, of course, is sometimes you actually want to force a yes/no answer. A politician wants to avoid it by, so you might ask Mr. Mayor, I want a yes or no question, just one word. Did you take money from the mafia as police allege in their affidavits? Just one word. And he'll say, well, it's a different, and you keep coming back and saying, Mr. Mayor, it's a simple question. One word. Why won't you say yes or no? Now, this was obviously prearranged when Lance Armstrong sat down with Oprah Winfrey, but watch how she clearly sets out the rules, tells him later on he could expand. Right now, she wants a one-word answer.
Let's start with the questions that people around the world have been waiting for you to answer. And for now, I'd just like a yes or no.
Okay.
Okay? This whole conversation, we have a lot of time, will be about the details. Yes or no? Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
Yes or no? Was one of those banned substances EPO?
Yes.
Did you ever blood dope or use blood transfusions to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
The beauty about forcing somebody to ask yes or no is if they refuse, it really gives you a great opportunity, and you could, print it up quite well online, where you could say the mayor refused to answer yes or no whether he had taken money from the mafia. Instead, he said, and then you give his quote, because that's what you have to do. Um, I find this very effective with people in power and with people who are victims. Remember rule number 4 about not making statements. Sometimes, especially in a scrum, obviously on TV, but even when you're writing online stories, when you're in a scrum, there may be excerpts of your questions. Sometimes you have to act as a human being, not just as a journalist, and go with your gut. Talk about sound. This will be quite loud. This is when Trump was running as a candidate. He's being interviewed by Anderson Cooper.
Just the last question before we do, I got to ask you about this back and forth between you and Senator Cruz about wives. After saying that you were going to spill the beans about Heidi Cruz, you retweeted an unflattering picture of her next to a picture of your wife.
I thought it was a nice picture of Heidi. I thought it was fine.
Come on.
I thought it was fine. She's a pretty woman.
You're running for president of the United States.
Excuse me. I didn't start it.
Oh, but
I didn't start it.
But sir, with all due respect, that's the argument of a 5-year-old.
I didn't start it. No, it's not the.
Yeah,
no,
the argument of a 5-year-old is he started.
You would say that.
See, I love that, because when he said that, whether you're in favor of Trump or not, everybody is thinking when he says, I didn't start it, you're saying, that's what my kid says, right? And Anderson Cooper just blurts out, making a statement, and I think it works. He doesn't ignore it. NBC's Savannah Guthrie did the same thing on Twitter Lies.
Just this week, you retweeted to your 87 million followers a conspiracy theory that Joe Biden orchestrated to have SEAL Team 6, the Navy SEAL Team 6, killed to cover up the fake death of bin Laden. Now, why would you send a lie like that to your followers? You retweeted
That was a retweet. That was an opinion of somebody, and that was a retweet. I'll put it out there. People can decide for themselves. I don't take a position.
You're not like someone's crazy uncle who can just retweet
no.
whatever.
That was a retweet, and I do a lot of retweets.
Now, might be a little strong. She's on TV. She's not digital or in print. But at some point when you feel you have to make a statement, you make it, and you generate a response. This is a great example of a journalist who breaks the rules by making a statement, but because she crafts it with a double negative. Now, Canada's retiring Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, his father was Pierre Trudeau, is renowned for being swift on his feet, a glib talker. He was on the spot during his rule for taking a free holiday from the Aga Khan. There's a scrum, and watch what one of Canada's leading journalists, Rosemary Barton, does in her question. And I'll show you the question word for word later. Oh, actually, sorry. Here you'll see the question. Let me go back. Here we go.
So how could that not have occurred to you, with all due respect? You were going to take a free holiday from someone you consider a friend. How could it not have occurred to you that that might not have been okay?
The fact is, we work, sorry, let me just try to reorder the thoughts.
Uh-oh.
We worked with the lobby conflict of interest commissioner on a regular basis on a broad range of issues when the issues come up. On this issue of a family vacation with a personal friend, it wasn't considered that there would be an issue there. Obviously there was a mistake.
Say to yourself, this is not maybe the best thing to do? You never thought that?
Khan is someone who has been a longtime friend of my family's, a friend of mine.
So watch what she does. She breaks the rules because she makes a statement. You were taking a free holiday from someone you considered a friend. Those are words he could have jumped on. It wasn't free. He's not a friend. But she knows her facts. What she does is she carefully asks an emotion and an accountability question. And she also asks it as a double negative, right? How could that not have occurred to you? That might not have been okay. So either he says, you're right, I never thought about it, I'm stupid. Or he says, you're right, I did think about it and I decided to do it anyways. That's why he's caught like a deer in the headlight. Then she does a follow-up because he kind of says, buh. And she asks really the same question. At what point you didn't say to yourself that maybe this is not the best idea? You never thought that. Really the same question, but again, couched, in a double negative. A great example about putting a normally quite adept politician on his back feet. All right. Let's move on to what you do when you get into trouble. I've tried to show you some tricks that the powerful people use and ways to avoid it, and some tricks you could use. But no matter what you do, you will always get into trouble and you're going to lose more than you win. It's rare I come out of an interview and I'm not kicking myself, especially when I play it back, for missing a key turn or for completely blowing it. So what to do when the interview turns into an argument? We saw Lucy Williamson, right? How she stood her ground. I'm not a big fan of Pierce Morgan, but this is a good example of using humor. You're sitting in the office of a corporate executive who's accused of wrongdoing, or you're sitting in the mayor's office. Now, we're not talking here where they're lying to you. They're saying, no, I didn't take the money. No, we're not polluting the river. This is when they're refusing the interview. They're kind of saying, I'm not going to answer that question. I don't want to talk about it, right? So what do? We saw how Lucy Williamson did it. She said, I'm asking the questions, you choose the answer. Watch how Pierce Morgan uses humor to deflect this Republican politician about her book.
Right now, I'm curious about whether you support gay marriage.
You're borderline being a little bit rude. I obviously, I obviously want to talk about the issues that I choose to talk about in the book.
Do you answer that question in the book?
I talk about my religious beliefs. Yeah, I absolutely do.
Do you talk about gay marriage in the book?
What relevance is that right now? Is there a piece of legislation? I mean, I shouldn't be voting on it.
It's obviously one of the most. It's obviously, as you know, because of Michelle Bartman's views and others, it's obviously a highly contentious political issue. I'm just curious what your view is. You keep saying it's in the book. So I'm bemused as to why you wouldn't just say it in an interview if it's in the book.
Because I don't think it's relevant.
He uses calm words. I'm bemused. I'm curious, right? Not aggressive.
It's not a topic that I choose to embrace. It's not what I'm championing right now.
Why are you being so weird about this?
I'm not being weird about this, Pierce. I'm not.
Great trigger word, right? Why are you being so weird? Again, showing bemusement, and she falls into it.
Running for office. I'm not promoting a legislative agenda. I'm promoting the policies that I lay out in the book that are mostly fiscal, that are mostly constitutional. That's why I agreed to come on your show. That's what I want to talk about. I'm not being weird. You're being a little rude.
I'm baffled as to why you think I'm being. I think I'm being rather charming and respectful. I'm just asking you questions based on your own public statements and now what you've written in your own.
And this is just, a lighter version of what Andrew Tate was doing with Lucy Williamson, right? He said, I've invited you into my house. I'm the boss. And she says, no. She's doing the same thing. And he's just using humor to deflect.
Look, it's hardly rude to ask you that, surely.
Well, don't you think as a host, if I say this is what I want to talk about, that's what we should address?
Right? She's trying to grab the ball. Don't you think if I want to talk about something, we should talk about that? What does he do?
Not really, no. You're a politician.
Yeah, okay, I'm being pulled away. We turned down another interview for this.
Where are you going? You're leaving?
Well, I was supposed to be speaking at the Republican Women's Club at 6 o'clock, and I chose to be a little late for that, not to be, not to endure a rude talk show host, but to talk to you about my book and to talk about the issues that I address in my book. Have you read the book?
Yes, but these issues are in your book. That's my point. You do talk about them.
Okay. All right, are we off? Are we done?
I'm not. I'm still here. It would appear that the interview has just been ended because I had the audacity to ask questions based on stuff that's in this book. Anyway, it's a good book. It's called Troublemaker. I think we now know why it's called Troublemaker. Christine O'Donnell, available in all good bookshops, Making America Great Again.
What's the one mistake Pierce Morgan and his producer obviously made?
Allowing her to have control to end the interview.
Yeah, but you don't have much, and in the end, that makes it, right? I mean, if somebody wants to walk away, and that's the other thing, we're not police, right? Nobody is obliged. The mayor is sitting down to an interview with you. If he wants to walk away,
Camera.
yeah, you don't. No, but when she asks, "Have you read the book?" you can see a flicker in his eye. He didn't read the book, right?
Yeah.
Because if he had read the book, all he had to do was to say, I don't know, on page 171, this is what you say about gays. He never quotes from the book. If the debate is about her views on gay marriage, he should quote from the book. It's kind of sloppy, I think, sloppy journalism. But I'm using this, though, as a good example. And you could use this, especially if you're not, I mean, I've sat down with the Taliban and with the Ku Klux Klan, so you don't want to make too many jokes with them. But in this case, you can lighten the mood by saying to the mayor, why are you being so, especially you would know the mayor regularly or the head of city council or the union leaders. You could use a bit of levity and say, why are you being so weird? Why won't you answer this question?
Right.
It can really work. Okay, this is, I think, my favorite example because it goes to everything we've been saying. This is Jake Tapper's interview when Trump was a candidate. Remember the scandal over the judge had made an unfavorable ruling in his somewhat sham Trump University. And Trump started complaining about the Mexican judge. Now, watch, it goes on for about 5 minutes. And watch how Trump, unlike Tate and that Republican politician, won't try to take control. Trump does what Trump does. It's this water hose, right? He just spews out stuff and keeps trying to distract, going down crazy alleys. And watch how Jake Tapper not only doesn't fall into that trap, he even concedes points where he knows Trump is lying or is wrong, but he's not interested in that. He knows if he goes down that path that Trump has laid out, it's a trap and he'll get off focus. So Jake Tapper never loses focus. He basically asks the same question. His focus, and I do a whole other course on what the focus of your story is, but his focus is on, isn't that a racist approach to denounce somebody because of their heritage? Let's watch. Well, I'll try to pause it regularly so we can catch it. Here we go.
Plaintiff. So we said, let's dismiss the case. That's okay. Let's dismiss the case. And he said, no, I won't dismiss the case, and she doesn't have to be the plaintiff. Let me tell you. I'll tell you what it has to do.
Okay, first question. What does that have to do with his heritage? Doesn't talk about the dismissal. That's really the question he's going to keep asking.
I have had ruling after ruling after ruling that's been bad rulings, okay? I've been treated very unfairly. Before him, we had another judge. If that judge was still there, this case would have been over 2 years ago. Let me just tell you, I have had horrible rulings. I've been treated very unfairly by this judge. Now, this judge is of Mexican heritage. I'm building a wall, okay? I'm building a wall. I am going to do very well with the Hispanics, the Mexicans.
So
everybody.
no Mexican judge could ever be involved in a case that involves you?
So he doesn't just go down the debate about whether the other judge would have been better. He keeps asking the same question about race.
A member of a society where, very pro-Mexico, and that's fine. It's all fine. But
Except that you're calling into
I
question
think
his
he should
heritage.
recuse himself.
Because he's
then
Latino.
you also say, does he know the lawyer on the other side? I mean, does he know the lawyer? A lot of people say
But I'm
yes.
not
I don't
talking
know.
about that. I'm talking
Well,
about
that's another problem.
Literally, I'm not talking about that, Mr. Trump. I'm talking about racism.
You're invoking his race when talking
Here's
about
what I'm
whether or not
saying.
he can do his job.
Jack, I'm building a wall, okay? I'm building a wall. I'm trying to keep business out of Mexico. Mexico's fine. There's nothing.
But he's American. He's an American.
He's of Mexican heritage, and he's very proud of it, as I am where I come from.
But he's
my
an
parents.
American. You keep talking about
Jake.
It's a conflict
Jake,
of interest because
Jake,
of Mexico.
Are you ready? I have a case that should have been dismissed already. I have thousands of people saying Trump University is fantastic.
Okay, this is a key diversion, right? See, just as Andrew Tate talked about the fake Sophie, right? Trump is wrong here. Jake Tapper could easily say, but that's not true, Mr. Trump. But watch what he does.
I have a case that should have been dismissed.
I don't really want to litigate the case
You have to.
of Trump University.
Because if he was giving me fair rulings, I wouldn't say that.
My question is,
Jake, if you were giving me fair rulings, I wouldn't be talking to you this way. He's giving me horrible rulings.
I don't care if you criticize him. That's fine. You can criticize every decision.
See, Jake actually then gives Trump the freedom. He says, that's fine. You might be right. I don't care. That's not what my interview is about. Oh, sorry.
What I'm saying is, if you invoke his race as a reason why he can't do his job.
I think that's why he's doing it.
Is it not, when Hillary Clinton says this is a racist attack, and you reject that, if you are saying he can't do his job because of his race, is that not the definition of racism?
No, I don't think so at all.
No?
No, he's proud of.
And people can make up their mind. It's one of the best examples of you're never going to get Trump or any politician to say, you're right, I stole the money. You're right, Jake, I admit it, I'm a racist, right? Not going to happen, right? You have to let the viewers or your readers decide. All you can control is the control over the interview. And there were multiple times there where a less experienced journalist would fall into the diversionary traps that Trump has laid. And Jake constantly says, that's not what I'm talking about. And he even bends over and says, that's fine. You may be right about that. I don't care. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about racism. Just keep this in mind when you're setting out to do your interviews. Keep asking the same question. Final example. It's an old one, but it's classic. Katie Couric is interviewing Sarah Palin. And she'll basically ask the same question 3 times, just, in different words. Here we go.
And when it comes to establishing your worldview, I was curious, what newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what ones specifically, I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years. I have a vast variety of sources where we get our news to. Alaska.
Do you think she reads newspapers? Right. Right. So it's a good example, and this is something you can do in a scrum, is the question you want to ask, and you formulate 4 different ways of asking it as the person in power refuses to answer the question. And then it's great at the end if you could say, I'm curious or I'm befuddled, Mr. Mayor. We keep asking you, when did you first know about, the illegal contracts to that offshore company, and why won't you answer the question? It's a great, great tactic. The final thing I want to talk about before we go on to strategy and tactics, because a lot of you, obviously, we're going to interview people in power, but we also interview victims, right? Survivors of the fire, wrongdoing, corruption. I spent a lot of time in war zones, so I land up interviewing a lot of people, who have suffered various forms of oppression or abuse. Now, the same rules apply, but in a different way. And the big difference is when I interview somebody who doesn't have power, I do something I would never do to a politician, is you take control of the ball and you give it to them. You say, I know this is difficult, and I want you to know at any time you can stop the interview. You could not answer the question. I want you to feel in control. Now, why is this important to do with people in this situation? Let's get some feedback. Why do you think it's important?
Because they already feel vulnerable and they're probably scared just talking with you. So you need to make them feel a little bit more comfortable.
That's
Also a
exactly it.
bond of trust. It puts you both on the same side, essentially, like you're there for them versus there to attack them.
Yeah, and there's also a mercenary reason. The more they're at ease, the better quotes you'll get. But the main reason is exactly that. The very definition of being be good also if I knew how to spell. The very definition of being a victim is that you've lost agency, you've lost control. And if you're just another, and often in my case, I'm a man, obviously, I'm white, right? If I come into a war zone or a place and I'll say, well, tell me about what it was like when the soldiers came in and raped all the women. It's just another position of power coming in and exerting power over them. So it's really important to give them the power they have been denied. That's the key thing. Now, at the same, another thing I think that comes up, I've had it often, certainly when I was interviewing young girls who were trafficked. How do you balance, because you're a journalist, but how do you balance not being emotionally involved and yet at the same time not pretending you don't care about their suffering, right? So, what do you do when you have to push what's going to be an uncomfortable question, especially if you're a man asking a woman, but in any circumstance. What are some things you can do to ease the difficulty that you might have pushing buttons that might lead to trauma or difficult memories? Any ideas or any experiences?
I think one of the most powerful things is your tone of voice and your body language. That
Yep.
says a lot.
Yeah, but that's a very good point about body language. It means, and when we talk later about strategy, I'll give another example. That's true. Yeah. What else can you do about maybe being honest about yourself? One thing that I've done I mean, obviously I'm mainly a professional journalist. If a politician asks me what I think, I say it's not important. What I think isn't important. When I sat down to interview a leader of the Klan, and at one point he said, "You're Jewish, aren't you?" So I'm not gonna, unlike Mike Wallace, I can't not. I say, "Yeah." Do you have a problem with that? No. Okay, let's do the interview. Right. So there you move on. But there are times when I know I have to ask a question that I don't want to ask. It's a, you know, it's a tough question. And what I try to do is be honest with myself and with the person. And I say, look, I've got to ask you some difficult questions. And these are hard for me to ask, but it's my job. I have to do it. So let's move on. And if you're having trouble with it, we can stop anytime. I guess what I'm saying is you should, which I would never do with a politician, but with a victim or a person who doesn't have power, I will acknowledge my own emotions. And while I feel uncomfortable about this, and I think it shows a humanity and a humbleness that they're not used to. So that's something I've learned over the years. So I say things like, these are painful and difficult questions, but I have to ask them. But if you feel uncomfortable, we can stop anytime. The other thing is people are not natural storytellers. You have to guide them. I heard this from somebody. You have to make them the stars of their own movies. I love that line. I wrote a couple of books on child abuse, internet predators, and girls who were trafficked. And I went to a lot of conferences where social workers and police forensic investigators have to interview young kids. And again, you often have like an older male cop or a female cop interviewing this 6-year-old, and they make them the stars of their own movies before they get into tell us about how your uncle raped you. It's like, tell me about that day. How did it start? When do you wake up? What do you have for breakfast? Right. And they just make them the stars of their own movies. I love that phrasing. But at the same time, the powerless may hide the truth for different reasons. We couldn't hear those audio examples, but when we did a documentary helping a woman clear her name for being wrongly accused for killing her infant daughter, we still had to push her. We had to push her to admit she was a bad mother, that she was a cocaine addict, that the police were right in suspecting her. They were just wrong in trying to convict her. So you can be probing without being intrusive. All right, we've got I think about a half hour left, right? So I think we have some time to look at strategy and tactics. The only thing I wanted to briefly digress, I do most of my training. I'm going off to Bangladesh. I've been there quite often, and I've trained all through the Middle East. And so I do a lot of training in storytelling, which is everything from writing, structure, how, what's the narrative arc of your stories. I've been reading your online stories, and they're as clear and as concise as any good journalism outlet. But I think, like any newspaper, like any news organization, we have to be better at storytelling. We're pretty good at the news, we're pretty good at facts. I'm not sure we're great storytellers. And that's even more important these days. And that's what interviews are all about. You could download, I should go back. You could download my slideshows on storytelling. But what I want to just briefly uh, talk about is that your interviews too have to be a story. Not if you have 3 minutes with the mayor, but if you've got a half an hour with the mayor or a union leader or an environmental activist, you pretty much have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. If I have the time, I'll no matter what my interview is about, I'll say, tell me about how you got started in this. When did you first, if I can, I go back to their childhood, depending what my story is about. Then the middle, and then the end. The end also means where's it going? Where's it going from here? I like to think of the 5 C's. And if you could write down the 5 C's, if you're doing an interview with almost anybody, certainly the main protagonist in your story. I was reading, you've been doing a series on health and diabetes. You've been covering, obviously, the natural disasters, the fires. If you have a main protagonist, good guy, bad guy, the person responsible for the mess, or the activist trying to clear it up, it doesn't matter. You always need the 5 C's, which means your interviews have to ask questions of all 5 C's. What are the 5 C's? Well, the first is the character, the protagonist. You want to know everything about that person. What makes them tick? What influenced them when they were a kid? How did they get to be mayor? Then you need the context, of course, right? The latest environmental report and why the mayor didn't read it. What you need to know, and it's why readers should care. Finally, conflict. That's going to be the guts of your interview. 80% of your interview is going to be the conflict. Conflict could be internal, it could be emotional, it could be physical. If it's a game, right? If you were doing a sports story, is who's the player? Where do they sit in the playoffs? Most of it is going to be on the 3 periods of the hockey game or the 2 halves of the football game. Then the climax, the score, the key turning point, the mayor resigning, the outcome, and then the conclusion, which is usually forward looking. So I write down these 5 C's and I look through my questions and I make sure I have all 5 C's, also usually in that order. So you can put somebody at ease by saying, tell me about you. Tell me the background and the facts. Now let's get into the conflict. Then you get the climax. And then your final question is, where do we go from here? It's a good way to structure your interview. Yeah, quickly, strategy and planning. Okay, let's look at, this is important, certainly when you're doing investigations. You're investigating a corrupt union leader, a landlord who has fire traps in the homes that he's selling, or the mayor. When do you notify your target and how? I've changed my view on this over the years, especially when I was doing an investigative TV show for many, many years. We would often wait till the last minute till we gathered all the information before tripping the wire. I now and we uh, pretty much, change our views, and almost as soon as possible. Certainly, once I've gathered enough information, and also if there are any interviews you need to secure that your target might interrupt or stop you from getting. But I think it's important to trip the wire fairly soon. One, because we're journalists, we have to be honest. Um, you might very quickly discover you're on the wrong track. They'll give you information where you go, oh, I got that wrong. And if they start coming after you with lawyers or whatnot, you're just better prepared, right? So my general rule is after you've got some of the basic information, don't wait too long before you reach out to your target in a very neutral way and see what they have to say. Second, and this happens often,
Julia, can I
people.
ask one question about that? Why have you
Yep.
changed? Because I guess this has been an evolution, but for you too.
Well, one reason is very specific to Canada, although I think the rules are somewhat the same. We don't have First Amendment rights. There's no freedom of the press in our Constitution. But they changed the laws, and it's kind of similar to what you have, which is the absence of malice, right? In your libel laws. So they called it responsible communication. What the courts ruled is that if a journalist has done everything possible to try to verify the facts and has told the person all the bad stuff that's going to be in the story and has given that person every opportunity to respond, then even if you got something wrong, it shows absence of malice. That's in your law, and we have it. Ours is more positive. It's called responsible communication. And so we did a story, if you look online, the Paradise Papers, we did a story on Justin Trudeau and his key financial fundraiser, Stephen Bronfman, who had money overseas, offshore money. It was a huge scandal. It took us 6 months of investigation. But from the beginning, we wrote to the Prime Minister's office and the Bronfmans. We showed them some of the documents we had. We were curious. We say, our interpreter, looks like you had offshore money. Could you explain, right? And we were very diligent. So when the story came out, they pretty much knew most of what was going to be in it. We bulletproofed it. And if we were wrong, we had a defense. So I think that's why. We're not we're not mean-spirited people. Somebody once said, do you believe in gotcha journalism? And I said, well, what I don't believe is in misjet journalism, right? So, if I'm have a target, I want to, speak to that person as much as I can to make sure I'm right and to give them as fair a chance as possible. It'll make your story stronger. So that's why I've evolved. I hope that answers the question. You have to show absence of malice. You have to show you're not afraid to show them everything. New York Times does that all the time with their big investigations. Now, sometimes the government can, with the wiretap rules, the New York Times wrongly decided to agree with the government and not run with the story. But most of the time, they will show a list of questions to the person and say, can you answer them? And then they say the person refused to answer. Now, what if you can't do the interviews? The person refuses. I never lie or sweet talk. I don't say, oh, Mr. Mayor, we just want to talk to you about your lovely children, or anything. I mean, I never bullshit. I always tell them what the story. I don't tell them everything I have, but they know what the interview is about. Another thing that I do is I speak to everybody around them, friends, colleagues. I did this with the bikers when they didn't want to speak to me. I spoke to everybody who would speak to me. And then you kind of say, look, you don't have to be in the story, but everybody's talking about you. It would make a big difference. And you make it clear that the story is going, you not talking doesn't make the story weaker, right? I've got a very strong story. It'll just be better with you. And then you build up the ladder of allegations. I keep giving them more and more reasons to worry about what I'm doing. And hopefully that'll force them to talk. Get rid of the notepad. This is so important. I can't do this live if I was with you. But if tonight you go home and you ask your partner where they were last night, because you heard they were at a bar, with somebody they shouldn't have been with. Or if you ask your kid who broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, what are you doing? Where are you looking?
In their eyes.
In their eyes. The only two people in the world I know who, when they're asking an important question, take out a pencil and a pad are cops, at least cops on TV shows, and journalists, right? It is insane, especially nowadays because you've got an iPhone that can record and a tape recorder. There is absolutely no reason to have a notepad. You're talking to people, you want to look at their eyes. Now, you can have your list of questions so you can glance down. You could have an important document. You can have facts, figures, all kinds of quotes. That's fine. But why do you have to write down anything? In fact, the problem with writing down is I actually do the opposite. I always have a pen. I write down a word. If somebody says something like sad, and I say, oh, I've got to go back to that. I write sad, so I remember to go back to that either right away or in the future, right? If they say something. But the other thing I do is when they say something completely innocuous, I write pretending I'm writing. So they think, oh, that's important. But then when they say something really crucial, if you start writing, they start saying, oh, what have I said? Maybe that's important. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. So when they drop a bomb, I don't write. I just look at them as if that's nothing. When inside my mind, I go, yes, right? Got the quote, right? So I never use a notepad except to dissemble or to remind me of a couple of keywords. But get rid of the notepad, use your eyes. The reverse, though, is also true. I always double record. I always have my iPhone and then usually a tape recorder. I was once interviewing a cop with two other journalists when I was working for the Toronto Star. And at one point in the interview, at different points, all three of our tape recorders stopped working. So I always double record. You all have smartphones. You can buy a cheap recorder at Best Buy. By the way, completely random. Do you get transcripts of your interviews? Do any of you use Notebook LM?
No.
It's amazing. I'm working on my 8th book right now. I'll show it to you. Well, if we have time, but just go to Notebook LM, which is a free Google app. It's pretty easy to use. You upload any audio. So I do like an hour-long interview with 2 or 3 people. I'm doing a book on 1930s and a bizarre contest where a lawyer paid women during the Depression. It was a contest to see who could make the most amount of babies. Totally weird. I found descendants, and so I do a long interview with 2, 3 of them. You upload the audio, and literally within a minute, it spits out an amazingly accurate transcript. It won't have the names of who's talking, and it'll even give you a chronology and a summary of the story. And I'm sure if you ask it politely, it'll write the story for you, and Amy will never know the difference. No, seriously. But it's an amazing transcript. Voice memo in the Apple app in the iPhone does the same, but not as well as Notebook LM. Quite amazing. So always have a backup. Prepare your notes. Yep.
Can I ask a really quick question about recording? We're in a two-party consent state, so typically the interviewee has to agree to be recorded. What do you do? Are we not?
No,
we're
one
one-party
party
consent
state.
state. Are you fucking kidding? How did I miss
Yeah,
that for the
but-
last 2 weeks?
We want to be, I prefer to be as liberal as possible in terms of making sure people know you're recording.
Oh, I was doing because I thought we were in a two-party consent state. Okay, well,
We have the same.
Gonna be,
We
what do you do
we
when
have the
somebody
same.
gets kinda-
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, I mean, obviously it's better if you're in a one party consent. We have the same problem when we're doing investigations because for example, in Canada, it's not illegal to Canada's world is across the country one-party consent. But if we're phoning and interviewing somebody in California or Hawaii, those rules apply. And also at the CBC, our ethical guidelines say you can record without the person knowing, but you can't use it in the story. You can't use the audio unless that person knows. That's just our ethical guidelines. So we have the same issue. And it means, obviously, if you're in front of the person, you show them your recording. But it does mean, I think ethically, you have to say, do you mind if I record? It's really important for accuracy. Only if you're doing an undercover investigation. And I don't know what your rules are. In my news operation, you had to go all the way at the top to explain to the bosses why there was no way you could do this otherwise. You had to dissemble. So you had to walk in the office with a hidden tape recorder. And we've done it. We've had hidden cameras and tie clips, hidden cameras in eyeglasses, all kinds of hidden recording devices. So if you have to, you play the spy game. But that's only as a last resort, you know. So, you know, goes back to what I said about being debate. You know, we have to play the rules fairly. When the people we're interviewing can lie and cheat all they want, but we can't. Yeah, it's a problem. Okay, prepare your notes. I don't have time to show you all my notes. This is an example. I did a major investigation on a Texas man who was wrongly executed for killing his children when in fact the fire was an accident. So what I do when I'm preparing my interviews, you could see, is, you know, again, this was the fire chief who made all the errors, I think. So I start off with information, but I do it by subject. I pretty much have the answers that I'm expecting. Like any good prosecutor, I kind of want to know what I think the person is going to say, or I put in the answers that I really need to get, right? And then I build it by theme, as you could see, right? And the reason I also have a separate page for each theme. And the reason I do that is, remember we were talking about the notepad. So if I'm talking to somebody and they say, yeah, well, that was bad, but it wasn't as bad as the fire I investigated where 10 people died, and I know I do want to go there, and if I think this is the time, I just pull up that page. In other words, I have a separate page for each theme. So when the mayor jumps from pollution to sewage and you want to ask about that, I have my sewage questions ready. Now, I might say, Mr. Mayor, I want to get to that later, but if that's a good moment, I don't want to stumble through my notes and look for question 16. I have a separate page for each theme. Finally, and we'll end here, I think you have to spy on your interview subject. That is when you're doing it in person. When I walk into somebody's office in their home, I look at their photos. How many kids do they have? Do they have sports equipment? What law degrees? A journalist friend of mine I know was interviewing somebody and saw medical degrees from two different universities a year apart, and clearly realized they were dealing with a fraudster. It can be sometimes just to break the ice. Oh, you ski? Well, so do I. Or your kids are the same as mine. But it could also lead to a great question, right? Are you worried about the measles outbreak, considering I see you have some grandchildren, right? That really helps. Well, take a quick look here. This is a picture of a Russian priest, and I don't think you'll be able to spot anything. It's pretty hard to spot. Anybody see anything suspicious?
I know what it is. It's his watch, isn't it?
That's right. Very good. See, oh, sorry, geez. They had Photoshop tried to hide the fact that he had an expensive watch, but you can see it in the reflection, right? Now, I use this as an example. When I did my book, Caught in the Web, which was about internet child predators in the US and Canada and the UK, I spent a lot of time with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, in Washington, which are the main kind of hunters to protect children. And so this was a favorable interview, a sympathetic interview. And I was interviewing one of the hunters, and great interview. She gave me great answers. And I kept noticing there was like a letter she had posted on, the billboard next to her desk. The interview was over. I said, any other great stories you have, cases you've done? No, I think I've told you the best. And then I said, what's that note about? And she goes, oh, that's Amy. She was at Walt Disney School. Wow, right? And we saved her from her art teacher. Bam, that became a whole chapter. So the point is that she doesn't know what her best stories are. So look around and investigate the person you're talking with. All right. Look, as I said, you can find this slideshow on my website. The website is just my name, julianshare.com. You can go to journalism training and download this slideshow plus any of the other slideshows. I'll post the recording of this online as well. And you can keep in touch with me. Gee, I've got to change Twitter to Blue Sky. Although for the moment I'm still on Twitter, but not for long. And you can obviously keep in touch by email.